Ever stop to think if maybe those reality TV shows we all watched, the ones with the alliances and the backstabbing, if they were maybe doing a bit more than just keeping us glued to the screen?
This is a really interesting thought, isn't it?
Yeah, and today we're going to dive into this pretty provocative idea. It comes from an article called Televised Sovereignty Survivor, The Apprentice, and the Game Theory of Governance.
Right, and this piece is written by Peter Duke, who runs thedukereport.com, and Mathew Crawford from Rounding the Earth. They're both journalists, researchers, and you can find their work on Substack.
Exactly. And their theory, in a nutshell, is that shows like Survivor and The Apprentice, well, they might have subtly kind of shaped how we view authority, how we accept it in today's world.
It's a big claim. What really jumps out is their core argument. Duke and Crawford suggest these huge hit shows weren't just entertainment. They sort of acted as, well, they call them Trojan horses of mind control. That's pretty strong language.
It is. And they argue, based on their research, that the formats themselves weaponized non-cooperative game theory. And by being so watchable, so compelling, they kind of persuaded us, the audience, to accept power structures built on spectacle.
Yeah, persuaded, and makes you rethink those tribal councils or Trump pointing and saying, "You're fired," doesn't it? Suddenly seems less like just good TV.
Okay, so let's unpack this non-cooperative game theory idea that Duke and Crawford put at the center. What exactly is that, according to them?
Well, basically it's about how people make decisions when there isn't like a strong central authority telling everyone what to do or when trust is low. Think situations where looking out for number one often seems like the best strategy.
Right, so alliances might form, but they're maybe temporary, just for immediate gain.
Precisely. Duke and Crawford point out it often involves hiding your real motives and, crucially, understanding that sometimes betraying an ally might actually give you the biggest advantage in that specific scenario.
It's all about individual advantage then.
In this model, yes. Their analysis really highlights this. Individual gain, temporary coalitions, keeping your cards close to your chest, and seeing betrayal not necessarily as morally wrong, but as a potentially high-payoff strategic move. Adaptability is key.
And Duke and Crawford connect this back to John Nash, right? The game theorist.
They do. They mention Nash's work from the 50s, which helps explain how people figure out strategies even without trust or clear rules. And they made that interesting point about the movie A Beautiful Mind being popular right around when these shows were really taking off.
Timing is interesting.
It is. And Duke and Crawford are quick to point out this isn't just theory for game shows. They argue you see these same dynamics pop up in the real world anytime established rules or trust break down, like in politics or maybe business startups. Anywhere enforcement gets shaky.
Okay, so that's the theory. How does Survivor fit into this, according to Duke and Crawford's article? They call it the Republic of the Rejected, which is quite a title.
It is. And their take on Survivor is that its genius lies in creating this constantly shifting power structure. There's no fixed leader, right? Alliances are always changing because people keep getting voted out.
So everyone's forced to kind of scramble and make these deals.
Exactly. Deals that might only last until the next vote. But the real twist, the part Duke and Crawford really emphasize, is the jury.
Ah, the jury, the people who got voted out.
Yes. The very people you might have betrayed or blindsided are the ones who ultimately decide if you win the $1 million.
Wow. So you have to be strategic, maybe even ruthless to get to the end, but then you have to turn around and be persuasive enough to get votes from the people you kicked out.
Right.
That definitely elevates betrayal and persuasion.
It really does. And Duke and Crawford even note that the host, Jeff Probst, apparently told contestants they should study Nash's game theory.
No kidding. So it's maybe even explicitly part of the thinking.
Seems like it, or at least a recognized element. Duke and Crawford's research highlights that winning Survivor isn't just about challenges. It's about clutch decisions under pressure and, crucially, managing how that jury perceives you. The people voted out become the ultimate judges, or, as they put it, the displaced return as sovereigns.
Okay, so Survivor is this chaotic, alliance-shifting world. Then there's The Apprentice. Duke and Crawford called this one a CEO-style elective monarchy. Sounds different.
Very different. Their analysis points to a much more rigid structure. In The Apprentice, you have one person, Donald Trump, with absolute power. He decides who's out. Period.
No jury of peers there.
None. His word in the boardroom is final. Duke and Crawford argue that the whole setup, the tasks, the boardroom showdowns, that famous "you're fired" catchphrase, it all reinforces this top-down centralized authority.
So success here isn't about shifting alliances, but more about loyalty, competence, pleasing the boss.
Pretty much. It's about showing you can perform under scrutiny, follow orders, and gain the approval of that central figure. You're learning, essentially, to operate within and submit to that clear hierarchy.
And the article mentions Mark Burnett, the creator, specifically designed the show around Trump's persona.
Yes, Duke and Crawford emphasize that. Using corporate imagery, the boardroom ritual was all built to project that specific kind of authority. And those catchphrases like, "you're fired," became these really potent symbols of command within the show's world.
Okay, so we have these two massive shows modeling different kinds of power structures, one messy and decentralized, one very top-down. Now, Duke and Crawford connect this to actual political theory. They bring up Curtis Yarvin and Peter Thiel.
Right, and this is where their argument gets really fascinating and maybe a bit unsettling. They introduce Curtis Yarvin, who wrote under the name Mencius Moldbug on his blog Unqualified Reservations starting back in 2007.
And his idea was,
He proposed something called formalism. Basically, envisioning a state-run, like a company, with a CEO-type sovereign leader, centralized power, clear hierarchy. He famously called the U.S. system obsolete software, needing a reboot.
and Peter Thiel, the tech investor, was interested in these ideas.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
Duke and Crawford point to Thiel aligning with this kind of thinking, even saying things suggesting democracy and freedom might not be compatible anymore. They note his support for figures who seem to favor stronger executive control.
And the connection to Trump.
Well, Duke and Crawford lay out this timeline. Thiel endorses Trump in 2016, whose image of decisive leadership was built in large part by The Apprentice. Then they mention Yarvin reportedly attending Trump's 2025 inauguration events as an informal guest.
So theory and the practice sort of met.
That's the picture Duke and Crawford paint in their analysis. They suggest this sequence, the show's popularizing these models, the theory emerging, the endorsement, the theorist's presence. It starts to look less like coincidence and maybe more like, well, they use the phrase, the simulation produced a sovereign.
Wow, that's quite a statement.
It is. Their core argument becomes that Survivor taught us about power when trust is gone, and The Apprentice taught us about power in a strict hierarchy. Burnett built the stages, Yarvin wrote a kind of theoretical script, Thiel perhaps backed it, and Trump became the lead actor, embodying that specific command style.
And Duke and Crawford even connect it to recent events, a rally in 2024.
Yeah, they mention an incident where Trump reacted to some perceived threat by yelling, "Fight, fight, fight." They suggest this kind of response resonates precisely because it fits the persona established way back on the reality show. It implies that framework is still active, still influencing how we see leadership.
So the idea is that the audience, us, we've been sort of trained.
That's the assertion Duke and Crawford make, that we've been subtly conditioned to recognize, maybe even prefer, authority that operates through elimination, through performance, through public ritual, and that these TV simulations were part of that conditioning.
Okay, let's try to sum this up. We dove into this article, Televised Sovereignty, by Peter Duke and Mathew Crawford, researchers and journalists publishing on Substack. And their argument is pretty stunning.
It really is. The idea that hit reality shows like Survivor and The Apprentice weren't just passive entertainment, but might have actively shaped our understanding of power, possibly paving the way for a certain style of leadership. It's a lot to take in.
They connect the show formats, non-cooperative game theory, specific political theories from people like Yarvin, and real-world political events involving figures like Thiel and Trump.
Exactly. Duke and Crawford, drawing on their research, present this provocative case linking media, theory, and governance in a way you probably haven't considered before.
It definitely leaves you thinking. If we accept Duke and Crawford's analysis, even partly, what does that mean for how we should look at media today? How critical should we be about the power dynamics playing out on our screens?
That's the big question, isn't it? What are the implications if we start seeing governance itself through this lens of performance, spectacle, and elimination? It's certainly something to mull over.
This is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world.